And so that's sort of that investment when I'm talking about that future person looking back and saying, what do we need to be doing right now in order for us to be where we need to be?
Welcome back to the Culture and Legacy podcast, where we are having conversations with entrepreneurs, talking about life behind the scenes and just really getting into the reality of what it's like running a business. And today I have Iffy Ibekwe with me, and she is the one to talk about for leaving a legacy, trust, wills, estates planning. And I will be honest in that I do not know much about the topic, but I've had enough conversations where I know that this is something that we should all consider. Whether you're an entrepreneur or not, if you have a business, whether you're a solopreneur, if you have something to your name, I think this is something that we need to be listening into and be intentional about. So I'm excited for this conversation. I'm excited to learn, more importantly. And so, Iffy, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you. So for people who don't know you or don't know what you do, or even what the service that you offer, what that means, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
So my name is Iffeoma Ibekwe. I go by Iffy, and I am an estate planning lawyer in Austin, Texas. And all that means is that I help intentional women set up wills. What do you think about when you think of the wills? I help them set up trusts, sometimes to protect their children, sometimes to protect their assets, and other legal documents like LLCs, and I review contracts and things like that. So people are prepared in case there's any sort of emergency, or they know what's going to happen upon death, whether it's their business, whether it's their people, whether it's themselves. There's a way to prepare for that, and that's the type of lawyer I am.
Okay. So just to, I guess, jump straight into it, I feel like a lot of the people that I talk to, especially in my age bracket, I'm a millennial. I'm 28 years old. And even I'll just use myself as an example. It's just myself and my wife. We feel like we don't have a lot of possessions. We're both entrepreneurs. And if I'm honest, a will just seems like something that I need to do if I'm rich right before I die, And I just think of the movies where they're just like, gather all the children together and we're gonna read
the will.
We're gonna read exactly. Why is this such an important thing for even people of my age? If it is, I don't know.
Yes, I just like to add that I too am a millennial and I have a will. And it's a huge PR problem, I think, with estate planning in general. It's that you have to be old and decrepit and on death's door before you can think about planning, right? And that's a huge misconception. And it was one of the reasons that I entered this area of practice, because not only does it apply in that way, but it's like you have to be white, you have to be older, you have to have property, you have to be like a Walton, or I guess a Kardashian for our generation, in order to even look at that sort of thing. But for people who are young like you, I would say, why not consider the fact that we are all living longer, and say we reach that ripe old age of 99. Along the way, you might encounter getting sick, or you may need somebody to help you if you're unavailable because you're out of the country and you need a financial transaction taken care of. And the one I always tell people is like, we always assume that life will give us the time to do these things, right? And it doesn't mean that if you set up a will that you're going to die, but all it means is that you prepare, just like you pay for life insurance, you pay for car insurance. You're not saying, I want that to happen, or you don't wait till you have an accident and then say, oh, this is the phase where I'm supposed to do this. I really like to think of estate planning as something that everyone should do in preparation. And it really is a gift to your loved ones more than anything. If you set up something like a will, say you set up a will and don't look at it in 10 years. In 10 years, you could amass properties. You could have all sorts of things come your way, right? And have something to pass on. But even if you don't, you do need someone to help you close down your life. And a will makes that so much more simple and so much cheaper and it gives instructions when people are mourning. So that's one reason to get a will. And I can talk more about the other documents and how they're helpful even while you're alive.
Yeah. So one of the first things that you mentioned is that, you know, kind of I guess maybe this is a stereotype, is that these are for, you know, older white people that have property. Where does that come from? You know, like, especially now, you know, we're huge, where, you know, Black Lives Matter is, you know, is this big thing that's going on right now, and people's eyes are just being open to just
Yes.
the unbalance of between, you know, between races and between culture. Where does it come from that, you know, even on the opposite side of saying that, you know, wills and estate planning is only for older white people, that's almost saying that Black people don't have anything worth leaving.
Exactly. That's what it is. And it is a racist trope that we've bought into. It's a supremacist view that we are all struggling under in this society. And that is that, you know, there are certain things that are not available to us as Black people. I'll even lump in the term people of color on this, because we are not going to be that type of person who has anything to give on. Even saying that has so much power. I don't have anything. Well, that's not true. That's not true at all. Even if all you own is your car, even if it's your record collection, even if it's like your sneaker set, there is value. Everyone has an estate. And I really do think that it's very problematic. I'm glad that there is an awakening and even a reckoning going on in this Black Lives Matter movement, this iteration of it, where people are starting to question, why do I say things like that? Why do I think I don't have anything? Why do I think that I don't deserve to put things in order to protect myself should I get injured, for example, and give people instructions on how I want to be taken care of if I'm incapacitated. I think it goes back to that worthiness viewpoint. And I really do think like systemic racism affects every single thing and thought that we have in this country.
Absolutely.
And so as I'm seeing that questioned and broken down in all sorts of industries, it is affecting estate planning as well. And I'll give you an example of why it is important. When you think about Black people in America and land ownership, it's abysmal. We are on track to have zero, or if not negative, net worth as a people in the next 2 decades or so. And that's a problem. That means that we're not doing things in order to pass down our wealth, whatever we do amass, whether that is just buying a life insurance policy and leaving it to your favorite niece if you don't have kids, or your favorite charity that is in support of whatever cause it is that uplifts Black people. You're saying that in this life, I'm not going to make anything of it, so I don't need to plan for those things. And that's a defeatist attitude, right? But we can understand it from a historical perspective, because a lot of times land was stolen from Black people, property was misappropriated, ownership, creators' rights, things like that were not attributed to the actual maker or the creator of those things. And you can extrapolate that and apply it to all different walks and works even. And so for the land example, I have a friend who has hundreds of acres in the middle of Texas. And her father wants to make sure that that acreage is passed on to his children in equal share. He's having a really hard time in that county because, first of all, they can barely find lawyers. The lawyer works with the judge who owns the property across and he's hoping that that property is not properly redeeded, that it's not passed on for that legacy to continue. They've had this land since 1904 in Central Texas. As soon as they could open up and have land, they've had it. But members of the family have sold it off. For $2,000, they'll give you 40 acres. And they're selling off their legacy because of that mentality that, oh, it's worthless. It could have oil, mineral wealth, all sorts of things that
it's
I think
just land. Yeah.
It's land. Land has value.
Yeah.
And so it's that mentality, honestly, like, I don't want to live out there. I don't want to do anything with it. I'll just sell it off because I need quick cash, or we'll never have enough money to pay the taxes or whatever. And we fritter away legacy, and each generation starts a little bit behind and then has to come up. It's a problem.
That's so tough. So I just finished this book. Actually, I started a book club, but I know you're huge into book clubs and stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, a friend and I, we started a book club, and we just finished the book called Just Mercy,
Mm-hmm.
and
By
is
Brian Stevenson.
Brian Stevenson. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much, Brian Stevenson, he's an attorney, and he came out of law school and he started representing people on death row,
Right.
people who were life imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that hurt me the most were those of like the 13, 14, 15 year olds that were sentenced to life in prison. They've been in prison for decades
Mm-hmm.
until somebody found out about them. And and I'm just, obviously there's a misrepresentation between races in the prison system.
Absolutely.
And so I'm now I'm just listening to you talking about this, and I'm fresh off of that discussion of that book, and I'm just thinking of how, as a whole, cultures just are, they're just negatively being impacted by decisions that are being made by other people, and they're being influenced by, you need to believe this, you
Mm-hmm.
are going to grow up and you're going to be worth nothing, or
Right.
you are going to, you're going to continue on and you're not going to have any possessions to leave behind. And it's such a wrong
Mm-hmm.
mentality to have. And I guess the question that's coming out of this is, how do we see through the noise? How do we
Right.
look past? I mean, even me, I'm in, I'm 28. I'm married. We have possessions that have value, and I've never considered that we need to get this kind of stuff on paper so that if something happens to us, our possessions just won't go to a pawn shop, or just
Exactly. Or
whatever.
be at an estate sale, or just,
Yeah.
end up being picked through by whomever. And it's not just possessions. When you think about your estate, you think about like your physical property, everything you own, but you also think about, what do I have in the bank? What's the value of my life insurance? Do I even have life insurance? If that's something that you can, at 28, buying $500,000 of life insurance, you will never get it as cheap as you can today, right? So
Right.
maybe for 25 bucks a month, you and your wife take out, 500,000 to $1 million policy. I always say take about 10 times your current salary out, and just use that. Like, you don't know what's coming next. That could be for your children. That could be for, if you want to support something even after death. That all is part of your estate, right? So if my husband and I have $1 million of life insurance each, that's $2 million. God forbid if we were to pass away, that we are already giving to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to see that money, necessarily, because it's a life insurance policy. I plan to see that money while I'm alive in other ways. But that's in addition to, that's part of my portfolio. That's what I'm thinking. If you're thinking the long game, you're thinking legacy, you're thinking generationally.
Yeah.
And so part of it is, you got to capture those thoughts, right? The stuff that comes out. I don't have anything. I'm not really worth anything. I really don't own anything. Out of abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Those words have power. So even if that's like, okay, I don't see anything around me that indicates that this is a type of person that should do that, but I'm thinking about, what is my future self going to do? What does my future self say I should invest in now? What does
Yeah.
my future self say would be a smart move to move me to that next step in life? And you have to kind of start catching those thoughts. I'll give you an example of this. I'm on one of those group chats, Marco Polo video calls with a bunch of my Black girlfriends. There are 8 of us on that call. And every so often we'll get like someone on there complaining about, I went to support this Black business and it was terrible. The service was terrible. I couldn't get a call back. I wanted this service and it took this long to get it. And this is why I don't really like to fool with Black businesses. And I used to listen to that and I'd be like, oh, we have to do better. And then I caught myself very recently, mind you, and thought, why don't I ever do that to white businesses? Why can't I take their business as an individual who's a poor business person rather than a people group that is poor in business. That is another trope of white supremacy that's in my head that I had to unpluck that thought. Because if I'm willing to go have a bad experience at a white business and continue to patronize white businesses, why am I not about that for Black businesses? Because I look at someone like you and someone like me who are professional business people that get hurt because people won't come to us because they have had a bad experience at a barbecue joint, or they had a bad experience with a Black doctor, and then we have to suffer. And part of the reason is that Black people as a whole are we're a collective, we're community minded. And so when one fails, we all feel it. Versus white people, they consider themselves individualistic. And that ancestrally makes sense when you trace it back. And it makes sense. But we also have to start picking that out in our brains and saying, that community mindedness does not mean that we don't support each other, or if somebody does you dirty, so to speak, that you can never, ever deal with somebody in that community again. That hurts us. And so that's the kind of thing you have to do in order to combat it, is like, identify it. What is this? Where is it coming from? And how do I know that that's a lie? Because it's a lie. Any inferiority complex, any can't do right, will never be better than this, that unfortunately is a trope of being in a systemic racist, a racist system that we're in, and it affects all of us.
Yeah. You know, I was recently on a podcast. So one of the things I do is I do videography I do wedding videography.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was on this wedding videography podcast with a panel of other Black videographers, and we're just sharing our experience in the wedding industry as wedding vendors. And, you know, one of the things that came up and that I kind of went on a little rant about is, you know, why do we feel like, you know, when we talk about luxury weddings or, you know, these high-end events, that, you know, by not showing, you know, Black people in these spaces, do we inherently believe that we don't belong in these spaces, or that we just don't associate, not even just Black people, that we only associate white people with high class, upper class,
right,
have money, have these elaborate events, that we feel like to get to that place, I need to show that. I need to show that I belong in this space to be able to actually make it and thrive in that space. And it was challenging even as I was saying that, because I'm now looking at, you know, who am I associating myself with? Who am I challenging as well? But also, like, how, you know, what are the things that I'm putting in place in my business, and, you know, having conversations with my wife to put into place in her business, because all of these things ultimately fall on the household, you know. And I know, you know, you're a wife, you're a mother of 4 children, and so you see leaving a legacy, maybe even a little bit more practically than someone like my wife and I, who have no kids. We just have a couple house plants, but we can't leave anything to those.
Looking really good. Your snake plant looks amazing. I'm also a very avid plant person, so I actually know what type of plants you have.
Credit to my wife. She'll spend hours just, you know, playing with these and cultivating
They're
them,
amazing.
which is great. So I guess, you know, kind of bringing that home, what kind of got you into this space of like, you know, you are intentional about, I need to find women, talk to them, to get them to open their mind to, like, you have value, you have worth, you have something to leave. What ultimately, you know, how'd you find this space? What got you into this place?
This is a really good question. And just to your point about seeing ourselves in spaces or not seeing ourselves in spaces, and how that really messes with the mind. I think for a high-end photographer, I'm Nigerian, I'm a naturalized United States citizen. When I think of Nigerian weddings, I'm like, they will spend anything. That's like the stereotype, right? They'll go to Dubai and have it at the Burj Khalifa. Or the Burj, whatever the Burjes are. But it's one of those, like, Of course, we have those sorts of weddings. Of course, Black people are not a monolith. It doesn't mean you can't have a backyard soiree, but not everybody is backyard soireeing
Yeah.
at their wedding. So that's the same sort of concept when it comes to estate planning. I searched high and low for a Black estate planner in the Austin area because I just thought, oh, I just need permission and just to see somebody doing what I'm doing, solely doing this area and maybe a little bit of something else. That does not exist, y'all. I mean, I think throughout the country, there might be, that I have connected to maybe about 20 estate planning law firms. And that's people who are doing wills. What does that mean? Who's serving the Black community, first
Yeah.
of all? That's a problem. So how are we passing on our wealth? Who is advising us? I got into this line of work because a friend of mine works for a financial planner, and they, as part of their service, prepare estate plans. They pay for estate plans for their clients. And she told me there's a man who's been doing their wills that's putting the wrong name on the wills at the signings. Like
Wow.
they're at the signing, Matthew Reed is coming to get signed, and it has Iffoma Ibekwe written in there. That is
Wow.
absolutely
That's huge. That's a
horrific.
big deal.
That's a huge deal. And I thought, she's like, well, do you do wills? And in my mind, I was like, I do now. Because I think I had to see the level of ineptitude that people have regular business and being completely irresponsible in their work. I'm like, well, I would definitely not approach it like that. And I feel like God just led me in that area. And then another step was just having the confidence to say, I help intentional women and not families and not people, right? I said women, because I know that if you can speak to a woman, you can draw in her husband, you can draw in her parents, you can draw in her children, you can draw in grandchildren. She's like the hub of a family. And so a lot of people say, well, why do you work with men? I'm like, of course. But I intentionally chose to advertise to women because oftentimes in the law, women don't feel empowered and they don't feel like getting access to a lawyer. Most people don't. But if you break that down to women and then you break that down to Black women, there is a barrier for access. And so many lawyers are so impressive to other lawyers, but they don't speak to people who are their clients. And that has been the one factor, the differentiator that has propelled my business and brought people through the door, including men who are like, I just like how you sound online. You just sound like you'll take care of my family.
Yeah.
And it works. And my last point on this, I talk about how in the legal profession in the United States, only 5%, or maybe around 5 or fewer percent of the lawyers are Black. When you break it down to fields like mine, where you're talking about estate planning and probate, which is after someone dies, how you close up their estate, I would venture to say that those numbers are in the 0.00s because it's so rare. It's so rare that you find a practitioner in this area of the law who is accessible to everyone. I work within we talk about your ideal client. My ideal client is essentially someone like me, or someone who's a business owner and is like ready to adult. I'm there to help that kind of person rather than, oh, I own 17 homes and I need to set up an irrevocable trust for my grandchildren. So, that's not real life for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I think you really hit on something because you hit on a lot of things, but, one of the things that I feel like people do not understand is why does there need to be specific things, for lack of no word, why does there need to be specific things for Black people specifically? Why can't, in this case, there are, X amount of estate planning firms out there, they'll all take care of you. But, I think until you walk a mile in my shoes,
Right.
you don't understand why it is so important for me to see somebody, to work with somebody that looks like me,
Right.
especially when we are in a society now where it's like, okay, coming out of 400 years of oppression, and, not having, mentally feeling like I don't have a lot to leave,
Right.
which can be can be true because, somebody said it best on, my, not necessarily my grandfather, not my family, but, generationally speaking, my grandfather's grandfather was a slave,
Mm-hmm.
and coming from that, where it's like, okay, this is just, 4 or 5 generations, I may not have a lot to leave. And so
Right.
all that to say, I'm holding tightly to all of my possessions, and so to go ahead and trust that with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
that's a hard ask. That's a hard trust. And
Yeah.
so for people that don't get it, for people that, and I know you do some work with Be the Bridge, and I kind of want to segue into that.
Mm-hmm.
People who don't understand, why is it so important for there to be things specifically for people of color? What can we tell them? How can we answer that question?
Right. So there's a cultural, a collective communal aspect to being Black everywhere in the world. And I've traveled pretty much extensively through the world and seen various Black people, and you just automatically can relate. And I think that everyone can see that culturally, what Black people, it's like there's a collective spirit, right? When you are so used to not seeing yourselves except in various fields like entertainment, athletics, um, and other, maybe lowly positions in quote unquote lowly, I will say it like that, in society, it can be a little bit discouraging because you feel like you're pigeonholed. And so when you start seeing people who represent you and represent you in a very niche area, I have to say, I get a lot of proud parent type clients who are like, we didn't know we needed you. We didn't know we were
Yeah.
looking for you. I had a client the other day tell me he grew up in Philadelphia. And when they were growing up, because there were no Black lawyers, they were always told, if you want to do this kind of work, you need to find a Jewish lawyer, because that was the closest thing that they could associate with culturally, due to segregation, due to, you talk about 400 years of slavery, and then you have Reconstruction, you have Jim Crow, you have all the segregation laws put in place, even after civil rights movement, where people are like, wait, we're equal now. And you see all the systemic racism that has come out of such a tortured system, right? Where Black people have essentially never truly been free. And so when you see someone, and I see this with my clients, who's doing something that is very unicorny for Black people, but not because we don't have the brain capacity, but you may not have the access, you may not have the resources, you may not have the educational opportunities. It makes people feel a certain way, like they can say things like that. They can say, I'm so happy. I have this money, I have these assets, and I want to give it to somebody to help me take care of them. And you're that person, not just because you're Black, because like we talked about, just because someone's Black doesn't mean that they're great at business, because you're Black and you're great at business and you're Black, right? Yeah. It's like icing on the top. You put the cherry on top of the sundae, essentially. And so that's one of those things people have to understand, is like, this is still relatively new. Being able to be fully able to present yourself in society as a Black person without falling into, oh, you're angry, or you're a thug, oh, you probably have no husband and you're a baby mama, all the stereotypes that we carry with us, and have to have all these microaggressive statements made, and we experience that. It's finally like, let me just tell you how I feel. I feel like we're in a moment like that, and it's good because people are hearing, no, it's not okay to come touch my hair. Like even basic things like that, where you're like, for 20 years I've been in the workforce, and it's like, please don't put your hands in my hair. But then I become labeled like, oh, I'm trying to compliment you, but I'm not a pet. I'm not to be, I would never do that. Just even little things like that. Hopefully those messages are being heard and understood, that, many cuts will bleed you out, even small ones.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's very true.
I hope that helped answer your question.
No, yeah, that's good. And, so you do some work in with Be the Bridge. You know,
All
you have a
right.
big role in that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure even through that, you are seeing, you know, kind of, I guess now these words are the same, but the brokenness and misunderstanding of people. And
Right.
so even so, as I feel like you have a lot going on in that, you know, at the end of the day, you are still an entrepreneur. You have a
Mm-hmm.
business to run, um, but also you have your living legacy of your children as well. But then there's also like, man, this, like, you are representative of, you know, like you said, there's of everybody. There's 5%, you know, Black attorneys, and not only are you a, you know, a Black attorney, but you're also a woman, and
Mm-hmm.
that even makes it even smaller. And so it's like, do you ever feel like you need to be in all of these places because you represent a small percentage of people that even an even bigger percentage needs to see to be able to actually come out and be open with their lives?
I wish I had. I wish I could just be like, yes, I intentionally decided that I need to be in all these spheres. But no, I absolutely don't have that pressure on myself. Nor do I know like which way the climate of the country is going to go. I've been a member of Be the Bridge for about, I think about 3 or 4 years now. I'm the current president. And Be the Bridge, for your listeners who don't know, is a nonprofit organization. It was founded in 2016 by a woman named Latasha Morrison. And its mission is to do the works to for racial justice and racial reconciliation in the United States. And in an extension globally, really, because a lot of what happens here affects how people live throughout the world. And I am a board member. I'm the current board president of the entire organization and have been on the board for 2 years. I think I'm on my third year now. And I would have to say that when we were putting this, we put together curriculum to help white people. We have a whiteness intensive, which really breaks down those concepts of white fragility, white tears, all the things that we hear as buzzwords right now, anti-racism. These are not new concepts. It's just that now they're in the lexicon. You know, now everyone's like, oh, I'm buying this book by Ibram Kendi, and I'm reading Robin DiAngelo's book on white fragility. These are all people that we have espoused and promoted, and these concepts and what Brian Stevenson is doing. I remember joining Be the Bridge, and that was one of the first things I did was go listen to him at the University of Texas many years ago. But these are all things that this organization has been working towards. The difference now is that we have just taken off because such a time as this, we put all the framework, we wrote the curriculum, we got the word out, and it was just, you know, in churches here and there and within certain communities. Now it's a global movement. And we have tens of thousands of people who now like have the ears to listen, the eyes to read and learn.
Yeah.
And it just happened. I didn't plan it. You know, I was just part of the organization, and finally, like, you put in the work, and it's like you never know
Yeah.
when it will actually ignite and take off and you will be ready for it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of that investment when I'm talking about that future person looking back and saying, what do we need to be doing right now in order for us to be where we need to be? Like, for us, that meant we need to register our mark. You know, all the things that new business people are like, oh, we can't afford. We would always quibble about the cost of lawyers. I'm like, we need to register our mark because one day somebody will try and take this. And that happens to us all the time now. Or we need to make sure that we have our curriculum ready because we have time. Maybe business is not that, but one day we will be selling out all of this stuff. We don't know when, but we need to prepare as if it's going to be. And that's the same analogy I would use for estate planning. It's just preparation for the harvest, right? You
Yeah.
want to make sure that you have the tools and the mechanisms set up to receive it.
Yeah. That's good. That's so good, Iffy. So I want to talk to entrepreneurs, if we can. What are some things that, you know, so you're talking to entrepreneurs, and if you could step on a soapbox and just preach at them, you know, from the lens of, you know, in your roles, even from, from in Be the Bridge, or, in your firm, I'm just going to leave this open to you, but what do you want to tell them? What do you want to tell us as entrepreneurs?
Right. If I could tell myself what I know now after being in businesses since now my third year, I practiced law for 14, but I've been out on my own, started my third year. Every year has been profitable. Every year I'm afraid that I will never have another customer. I go through all of those things, even though that's not actually the case at all. I would say, while you feel like you're starting out side hustling, doing like the least as far as how you want, you don't know when your moment is going to come, when you might have a spark and influx, and you need to be prepared. So what does that mean? Start out with your goals and your values for your dream, right? Write down the types of values that your firm would have. I had a whole exercise I did with a friend of mine, and I talked about like the values of my firm. I said that one of them is boldness, passion, honesty, family, legacy, and responsibility. Those are the 6 values that I have for my firm. And then I would research them, and I would write a quote or a scripture that went with that. And it really, and I even asked my friends, when you think about me, what do you think? They all said, you're honest, you're bold, I'm passionate, I really value family. Like, these are actually my personal values. If that's what you want in your business, those are your values too. Where do you see yourself in 3 years? I want to have 2 employees and an office here, and I want to have someone answering the phones regularly, and our intake process is down pat, and I can send out an invoice, and I have my systems written out, and business is just rolling through. And you just go through these exercises. And I'm talking to people who are just like, is this going to work? Part of the reason that businesses don't work is people never do the foundational work when they have time, when their business is not working. So that when stuff starts to happen, they're like, oh, someone called me, but I didn't pick up my phone and it went to voicemail. It doesn't work like that. People want to know that you are able to take care of whatever their needs are as an entrepreneur, because you're professional and you have your foundation set. And that could even go to like your people and staffing. What are the roles? What is our employee handbook? What is the company culture?
Yeah.
And these are all things that take time. But when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, even if you are well into entrepreneurship and you're seeing that this is not working, have you set your foundation? That's a huge part of it. Do you have a contract in place so that if someone books you, you can immediately use it? Or are you Googling it and trying to put it together and hoping for the best? These are all investments that you need to make with your time and even your limited resources in order to set yourself up foundationally to receive when the phone is ringing off the hook. You can handle it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's huge just from a business perspective, because we, whether you like it or not, like, we are customer driven.
Yes.
If people don't find us, we're out of business. If people don't like us because we put out subpar service or products, we're out of business.
Right.
People don't return, we're potentially, out of business. And so these are the things that, though it's, I feel like we put a lot of emphasis in, I just need to be really good at what I do. But, especially when you get into entrepreneurship or having a business or even bigger companies, you realize that, really the big part of our business is the stuff that's behind the scenes.
Back office.
Yeah. When someone inquires, are we responding well?
Right.
What is the journey like?
What's the client experience?
Exactly, that client experience. And if you don't have that down packed, then you're going to suffer. And then on the other end of it, if you don't have your act together and then something happens, I mean, we are seeing companies and businesses just being stripped down. Yeah. Yep. Because they didn't have their act together, or they said something, or someone within their company said something that other people don't agree with, because you never put out a foundation of, hey, this is what we believe as a company.
These are our values. This is our culture.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And like you said, they're just folding. Yes. And I don't want anybody who's listening or watching this podcast, I don't want that to happen to them, Right. And this can be as simple as what do I believe in, and am I going to show that? How am I showing that? And that is an easy conversation to have now, before you say something that's incorrect, politically incorrect or whatever, and then you're just being raked
through the
and
coals.
yeah, exactly.
And I will say this about values being such, like, if you have no money and you just want to work on one thing, you're an entrepreneur, you have a vision, you have a dream, work on your values, because the values are the foundation. For example, when I'm hiring a paralegal and an administrative assistant right now. I just hired an attorney to basically duplicate me so that I can spend more time doing the back office and building the actual business. I hire based on values because I tend to like people. And if we get along, I'm thinking more like they could be a great friend. But if I'm hiring somebody and these are my company values, how do they show that they're honest? How am I interviewing them to get that? How do they show? And these are all things that you can do for free while you're building, right? Like setting up those structures, asking, these are the interview questions I'd ask while you're dreaming someone who wants this role. If they want to be my assistant photographer, this is the kind of questions I'd ask. This is what they would show me. This is what the job description would look like. Really putting that, people love to do vision boards and be like, I'm going to own a hut in Bali. Well, that's all good and great, but there's another level to that in like putting yourself through exercises. You work and you hate your job in the cubicle, but at night you get to go home and you prepared all this stuff because one day you're going to hire that person and you're just going to have that document prepared, And so I encourage your listeners, if you are just kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out, start laying your foundation. Start with your values, your mission, your vision, and just it'll propel you into everything you do, and it'll be easy to find alignment because you're going to be value aligned when you hire people. For example, one of mine is boldness, like I said. And on my applications, I said, we say Black Lives Matter and mean it. We practice anti-racism here. And in my applicant pool, I had a homosexual man who is an undocumented DACA person in the US apply. And I had a very conservative Christian apply. And how does that work? You think, oh, maybe that's too left leaning or whatever. What it says is that I am a safe space here. I am an open environment and I'm not ashamed to say it.
Yeah.
And so that person came in and the other person came in and they were both feeling I could work at a place like that. Yeah, so if that's an inclusive culture that you're trying to cultivate, that's how you do it. You just make the business the one that you would want to patronize, essentially.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good. So, Iffy, I want to ask you this this final question. I asked this question to everybody that comes onto the podcast, and we've talked a lot about legacy, even so from an angle that I've never had a conversation about. And so I want to ask you, what is the legacy that you want to leave?
I have a calling to encourage women, and I also have like very big dreams. And I know that the things that I have struggled with in my life, whether personally or financially, or even with confidence, I don't want to pass that on to my next generation. I can't control for that, but there are things I can't manage that, but there are things I can control in my life that will affect how, for example, my children see themselves and how they see money and how they see their self-worth. They are my legacy. My family is my legacy. How well everyone is mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. That is my legacy. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage more people, especially women of color, especially Black women, when we drill it all the way down, to stand into who God created them to be and to walk in confidence. I feel like I walk in confidence. I really have extraordinary self-confidence because it was instilled in me by my dad and my mom and the people who are around me and my family. And all we can do if we don't have that in our lives is be that example and really start to work to own that in our own lives so that exudes and it's just a norm. I want to normalize Blackness. I want to normalize extreme Black success. I want to normalize Black excellence because I see it everywhere. And I don't want it to be Black, necessarily, even though I love being Black. I just want it to be excellence. I just want it to be successful. I just want it to be well thought out and generational and, legacy without any sort of modifier in front of it. That's how I want us to be in society. And that is the legacy I hope to leave.
Yeah, that's great. That's very good. Well, Iffy, thank you very much for this conversation. 30 minutes ago, I'm just a guy. I have a business, whatever, trying to make money. But I think, a big takeaway for me of this is we all have something that's worth leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Whether, and it's not just our physical assets. And, I think that's something that we all can take away from this. Whether you think whether somebody may think that they're ready to, really sit down and put these things down on paper, even just from, the aspect of your company as an entrepreneur, there are values and things in place that we need to set so that the legacy of our company is protected.
Right.
Because, especially now, we're in this generation now where it's like, I am my company. You are your company. Our names, are our companies. And if there's somebody that's associated with our company and they tweet one thing that doesn't really align with, everything that's going on, then your legacy, the legacy of your company, is going to be impacted. And so we all need to protect ourselves,
right?
And that's super important. So if people want to connect with you or reach out to you, how can people find you?
So if you are on Instagram, I am at the Just In Case Lawyer.
Love that.
And you can follow me for all things. I mean, I really deviate from law a lot because I like to show, especially in my stories, like gardening and plants and my social justice rants. You can find them on there. You can also find me on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/Ibekwe Lawyer, IBEKWELAWYER. And then if you can't remember any of that, you can find me online at ibekwelaw.com. And I'm sure you'll put those in your show notes in case people can't spell it.
Yeah. Everything will be, they'll all be in the show notes. So yes, Iffy, thank you very much for this conversation. I'm excited for people to, really take this in. And, I feel like when we talk about law and wills and estates, it's kind of, back to what we're talking about at the beginning, like, oh, that's not for me. That's for, for older people. But even if you think this is for older people, this is something that we need to be thinking about and talking about now, so that when we are older, that, we know what we're doing.
And things will be in place.
Exactly. Because.
And to that point, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay.
But I was going to say, this is a very hard conversation for some people to have when they think about talking to their parents and when they think about applying to themselves. And one of the things that I love to do is just educate people on a very high level basis and let them know what it means to estate plan. And so if you ever have need for a speaker or someone to teach a seminar, I am also available for that through my website. I forgot to add that.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I've heard in this digital space, I've followed Iffy for a long time, and seeing the things that she's speaking and other podcasts that she's on, and it's a lot of good golden nuggets that she's putting out there that even if there's just like one thing that she says, it's like, oh shoot, I need to change the way that I think. That's what makes it worth it. So if you are listening or watching this podcast, thank you again for being part of this conversation. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram. You can listen to this on any podcast platform. And we thank you again. So subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. We thank you, and let's continue this conversation within this platform and outside this platform. So thank you.